Probably a passenger on a commercial flight.
Passenger on a commercial flight.
Hands down, passenger on a commercial flight.
As a professional aviator, one of the things that really amazed me when I had a doctor call me back in the 80s and say, a book that you just wrote is applicable to medicine, I thought, well, medicine has got to be right up to speed. I mean, what can we teach medicine? It turns out medicine is 25, 35, maybe even 40 years behind aviation in understanding this basic point, how to take a high-risk human enterprise and take it from high risk to low risk and high reliability. We had to do it in aviation because every time we had an accident, the whole world noticed, and we were killing people wholesale. We haven't had that kind of pressure in medicine, and therefore it's been very, very slow. Plus, the model for aviation was totally different than the model for medicine. The model for medicine has been a cottage industry using hospitals that are farmers' markets for doctors. The model for aviation was always one company trying to stay afloat and not hurt anybody.
You know, I think that aviation has been a model for anesthesia practice for a long time. And I think it makes perfect sense because as I think about this, both pilots and anesthesia providers take a patient on a journey, and it's a very dangerous journey. I'm thinking about the drugs that we use, the ones that obtund the autonomic nervous system, that paralyze the muscles, that stop breathing. At the same time, I'm thinking of a pilot who's taking a large plane down a runway in excess of 180 miles an hour. If they don't clear the runway, they're going to crash and kill everyone on board. If they lose power on takeoff, they're going to crash and everyone's going to die. Even when they lift off, they're in a hypoxic, freezing cold environment with little hope of survivability. And the parallel between what we do is that we both have a plan. Aviation does. The anesthesia provider has a plan. We both use electronic instrumentation to monitor where we are. And we both nauseate and sometimes create vomiting in the folks that we deal with. And it also takes me back to reading about World War II, which was a pivotal moment in aviation safety. What happened during World War II is there was a great movement towards understanding human factors and ergonomics in an exponential increase in the safety of aviation. At the same time, well, a few years later, Beecher's study, classic study, a Sentinel study in 1954, revealed that more people were dying from anesthesia every year than were dying from the polio epidemic. At about that same time, Beecher's work crystallized what was to become an epidemiological survey of anesthesia safety, and literally 50 years later, the Institute of Medicine identified anesthesiology, the field that we are in, the anesthesia care that we bring to patients, as perhaps the safest of all biomedical adventures. And the whole idea of where we've come from is an amazing evolution. The one thing I would also say about aviation and its similarity or dissimilarity to anesthesia practice is, do we really adequately inform people about the risks? Because if we really told people what we did to them in exquisite detail, if the pilot really told people what they were about to do, I'm not sure that any of us would go through this. So there's this sort of interesting overlap of anesthesia and aviation, and I think it's a really good model to compare the two and have that discussion.
We asked Christine Zambricki, Deputy Executive Director of the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists, how anesthesia and aviation are similar.
I think there are a lot of ways that anesthesia and aviation compare. and they're not necessarily favorable. In anesthesia, we've used aviation as a model, and we look to aviation to provide some guidelines as far as safety, but we really haven't adopted all of their practices. For example, in aviation, before you fly a new plane or before you use a new piece of equipment, or if there's a change made to an existing airplane that you're already certified to fly, you have to have skills validation, and you are not allowed to use the equipment until you go through that process. It's very rigorous. You must demonstrate competency with the equipment. And in anesthesia, and actually in hospitals, that's really not the case. There's almost a bravado about, oh, I have this new morcellator or something. You know, I can figure out how to use this. And people are used to, in the hospital, making do and modifying things. And so it's all part of that culture, that can-do culture, which, given the technology and the complexity in equipment today, is probably not appropriate from a safety perspective. So I think that's a big difference. We do not have rigor, and we do not insist without exception that if you use equipment, you know how to use it. Even equipment that people have been using forever. For example, how many people really know all the aspects of an infusion pump and all the things that it can do and all the safety checks in an infusion pump? And so as technology gets more computer driven and has really more safety features and more positive things for patient care, I would suggest that most people use it at maybe a third of the capacity of the equipment. So that's the big difference, that we do not insist on equipment checks. We still really do not insist on a way of communicating. There's some guidelines out there. People say, oh, you should read back, or you should introduce yourself. But it still is not as it is in aviation, where regardless of who you're working with, who your team is that day, who your co-pilot is, you know you're going to construct the communication the same way. And you're going to introduce yourself, and you're going to have a checklist where you go through things together. And if you tell the person to do something, they're going to read back to make sure that it's done properly. So I think communication is very different. And probably the third thing I think is different is probably the review of errors and how that takes place. I think in aviation it's constructed in a very methodical way. And in healthcare, it really depends who's the QA chief, who's the nurse anesthetist assigned to review the case. Are the people involved with the case reviewing the case? Maybe yes, maybe no. And whereas in aviation, it's really by the book. And actually, by the book reminds me, that's another difference in aviation, is there are really procedures for anything. I mean, if you have, that plane that went down in New York and he landed it, and I forgot, a bird went into the engine. There are procedures that you practice for a bird going in the engine. And in anesthesia, you know in a book somewhere there are guidelines, but it really isn't that you have a safety manual and something's happening, you flip to that and you say, okay, this is the taxonomy, this is what we do. Now, I think we have to acknowledge another difference between aviation and anesthesia is that anesthesia deals with human beings that are not machines. And so there is more uncertainty, and we cannot say that there is something in a manual for every single circumstance that can come up. But we surely know the common ones, you know, PE, aspiration, hypovolemia, hypotension. I mean, there's probably 95% of the bad outcomes come from common bad things. So there are those bizarre, weirdo things, which there probably are in aviation too, but aviation is probably more, I wouldn't say predictable, because you're dealing with nature and wind and shear forces and stuff, but the airplane itself can be understood, whereas a human being really cannot be totally understood.
On January 15, 2009, 155 passengers and crew boarded U.S. Airways Flight 1549, an Airbus A320, at New York's LaGuardia Airport. The flight was originally bound for Charlotte, North Carolina, but would never make it to its intended destination. LaGuardia Airport is seen here on the map. Just over the Hudson River to the west, in New Jersey, is Teterboro Airport. Using computer simulation, Exosphere 3D has recreated the events of that day. Less than 2 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1549 sustained major structural damage, losing power in both engines due to a bird strike over New York City. 2 minutes after the initial bird strike, passengers were told to brace for impact. Just moments later, Flight 1549 would come to rest in the Hudson River. As you view the recreation of Flight 1549, imagine, if you will, the parallel between takeoff in a commercial airliner and induction of a patient for general anesthesia in the operating room.
Cactus 1549, runway 4, cliff takeoff.
Cactus 1549, cliff.
49. Eagle 4718, LaGuardia, runway 4, position, hold traffic to land 31.
Position, runway 4, Eagle flight 4718.
Piedmont 4203, clear to land 31, and 36012, traffic to hold on 4.
Clear to land 31, Piedmont 4203.
You'll note on the screen in the upper right-hand corner the altimeter, or height above sea level, of the aircraft at all times. Just below that, its airspeed. And in the lower right-hand corner, the radio transmissions between LaGuardia's control tower and Flight 1549 cockpit crew, First Officer Skiles and Captain Sullenberger. You will also notice in the lower left-hand corner the view enjoyed by the captain and co-pilot that day.
Cactus 1549, contact Newark Departure, good day.
Good day. Cactus 1549, 700, climbing 5,000.
Cactus 1549, Newark Departure to contact, climb, maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549.
I would hope so. I think they definitely do.
I would certainly hope so. I believe they do.
I think when it comes to an emergency, I think they do what they think is going to be best.
Well, the role of the checklist is really to gain and maintain the same outcome every time. That's the role.
After an uneventful takeoff, First Officer Skiles, at the controls of the aircraft, directs Captain Sullenberger to complete the after-takeoff checklist. Note the conversation between the two pilots in the lower right of your screen.
Every day.
New York, Johnny 2760 is 5,000, turning your right to 150.
Johnny 2760, climb, maintain 10,000.
10,000, Johnny 2760.
With both engines now offline, Captain Sullenberger takes command of the aircraft. Note his direction to First Officer Skiles to complete a checklist.
Cactus 1549, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539, hit birds, so you've lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures, got emergency returning.
Who is
It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529, which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines, he said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. If we can get it for you, do you want to try to land 1013?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Johnny 2760, turn left 070.
070, Johnny 2760.
It is worth noting the calm demeanor of all involved.
All right, Cactus 1549. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Cactus 1549. Runway 4 is available if you want to make left traffic to runway 4.
80 Echo. I'm not sure we can make any runway. What's over to our right? Anything in New Jersey, maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually, LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, guys.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport, check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? All right. Jelly 2760, contact New York 126.8.
26.8, Jelly 2760.
Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, turn left thing 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, you still on? Cactus 1529, if you can, you got runway 29 available at Newark up at 2 o'clock in 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, climb maintain 12000.
Okay, 1,000 and 5 at 288.
Eagle 5 4718, I'm sorry, I missed that. Say again?
And we're up to 12,000, 288.
Okay, thank you. Eagle 5 4718, turn left 220.
CRM, and I can take you through the whole origin of CLRM, Cockpit Leadership Resource Management. It became Crew Resource Management, but basically it was this. We realized that no matter how many pilots we had in the cockpit, there was only one carbon-based brain up there controlling everything, and everybody else fell in line. Now, that was not only dangerous, it was killing people wholesale. And we've been doing this for a long time. The reason why was the most illuminating. It wasn't because we had bad captains and too many of them and we couldn't trust them to make the only decisions. It was because human beings, even when they are at absolutely their best, still make mistakes that are inadvertent. And the only way to cancel those mistakes out and keep a whole plane load of passengers from dying is to make sure that you've got other professionals up there on that flight deck who not only can speak up but will speak up. So you create a team. That was our salvation. Otherwise, we'd still be dropping a lot of airliners every other month.
I think the ORs in which we work have a mixed culture in terms of safety and teamwork. I think it's getting better. We have started running drills, for example. We have drills for loss of electricity. We have drills for fire. We've run drills for MH. We've done that as a whole team, not just the anaesthesia providers, but also the OR nurses. We've done that in obstetrics as well. So we have had an improved culture when it comes to developing the teamwork in the OR, and also in terms of developing drills for safety.
Then we really do have to do education in the settings with everybody from the hospital administrator who is putting that pressure to cut costs, down to the housekeeper who is going in the ICU, cleaning the floor. I mean, can't that housekeeper learn that if a patient's on a ventilator, the head of the bed has to be up? Because that's part of the bundle to prevent pneumonia. I mean, you don't need a medical degree to see if the head of the bed is up when they're on a ventilator. Why don't we teach everybody in the hospital that if they hear the sound of a ventilator, they should peek in the room and see is the head of the bed up, that some family member didn't put it flat. Why don't we have 5,000 points of light knowing that, rather than just the registered nurse knows the bundle and has been told this is the bundle and I have to suction, I have to do all this stuff. There are safety things that everybody could know and everybody could be part of the team to make sure they don't happen. So let's make a list of those things that it doesn't take a medical degree to know and teach the accountants that. So if they come up for a finance meeting with the nurse manager and they hear a ventilator, it's just second nature that they glance in and see, is the head of the bed up? So I think we have to broaden our reach and make it everybody's responsibility to make things safe, not just the person taking care of the patient.
No, I think they act on instinct if an emergency happens during surgery.
I would think they would also, although I think they have to be very reactive, you know, because of what can happen in the surgical suite.
But before they go into surgery, they would go through some kind of checklist to make sure everything was in the right place, everyone was in the right room, they had everything they needed before they went into surgery.
I don't know if you can have a pre-designated checklist to do, you know, you kind of got to be reactive, right?
I think a good checklist takes the human nature of people and takes the technological capabilities of the system that you're operating in the case of an aircraft. And you have a checklist that includes only those items that are absolutely necessary to ensure that the aircraft is operated safely, or the system is operated safely if it's not an aircraft. So you don't want to have so many items that truly probably are very important. You want to have the items that are critically important to ensure success of all the other items. And that varies from system to system depending on what we're talking about.
Checklists can be very helpful in crisis resource management or in everyday work in complex systems such as the operating room, because it organizes important information in a way that makes it easily retrievable when you're caring for a patient or trying to manage a critical event. So checklists can be tremendously, it reduces the cognitive load because checklists are usually easy to remember and easy to use. You don't have to think much about using them. The limitations then are that you develop this checklist mentality where it's the same way every single time, no matter who it is, every single time. Now the conditions call for something else, and sometimes we lose the ability to think outside of the box or think outside of the checklist. So I think it's a limitation that we should be aware of, but I believe the benefit outweighs the cost.
You know, checklists are an interesting thing. We've all had checklists with us when we go to the grocery store. We have checklists when we go to do our taxes. Or when we go to the hardware store. And what a checklist is designed to do is serve as a simple reminder. It's a trigger so that we don't forget things. What I have found fascinating over the course of my career, and more recently observing some of the work that's been going on with checklists, is that they have curiously, unevenly penetrated practice. There's a lot of resistance to checklists. And I think that the reason for that is, first of all, some people believe that checklists tend to undermine autonomy. I think that there is a sense in some domains where they may actually interfere with the progress of work. And there are some who argue, respected researchers and clinicians who argue that they kind of turn the brain off. I think that the overriding view that I have about checklists, at least in terms of ensuring safe patient care, is that they rarely, well, let me back up with that. I think that A technical solution to an adaptive problem rarely works. In order for a checklist to work, you have to have an attitudinal change and a removal of barriers. You have to educate people about the importance of the checklist and what it brings to care, and I'm not sure that that piece is always present.
I think normalization of deviance, again, is another characteristic of complex systems when there are many factors that come together in a process where we get just one step away from an approved process, and then we get one step away from that, and then we get one step away from that, and then we get one step away from that, where now complacency sets in. Because these steps away from what's approved practice hasn't shown us any indication that that's wrong, or nobody has suffered at the hands of that, we've come to accept that as okay. Well, while we know the standards were there in the first place to keep us safe, we're now deviating from that. But because nothing bad happens, we accept that to be normal. And you can see without much explanation how that could gravely impact patient safety. Let's say we stop checking the scavenging system on our anesthesia machine, but we've never seen any problem with doing that. Well, then maybe we won't check the pressure in the system or check the cylinder, the oxygen cylinder, because it's never run out before. And then you start adding one thing, adding one thing, adding one thing, and eventually there's a huge opportunity for that to catch up with us.
Normalization of deviance was discussed, this is November of 2011, about a year ago, in a prominent anesthesiology publication. One of the architects of that was a woman, a CRNA, Dr. Maria Margo, who's at the University of Pennsylvania, who collaborated with some anesthesiologists in bringing this idea of normalized deviance and production pressure to light. In fact, we recently reprinted that paper in the AENA journal. My take on normalized deviance is something that most of us engage in, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. And think of when you're driving your car down the highway and the speed limit is 55, but you see your speedometer, or you allow your speed to go up to 60 or 65 because you see everyone else around you doing that. At the same time, think of ultra-fast turnovers. A lot of us work in environments where there is tremendous production pressure. And we tolerate that because we see that it is a part of the culture. We see other people engaging in these behaviors, and we ourselves rationalize or justify that behavior. Think of kind of coming to an incomplete stop at a stop sign, where you're sort of drifting through, or at the same time engaging in an incomplete machine check. Think about texting in your car while you're driving, or texting in the operating room while you're taking care of a patient. We do that, or some of us do that, because we see others doing that. We see others getting away with it. Think about wearing scrubs outside of the hospital, to the grocery store, to the nursery, to the gym. Think about wearing scrubs from the nursery or the gym or the home into the operating room. That's something that we see a lot of people doing, and yet we absolutely know through systematic research that that drags infectious organisms from one place to another. Think about our often sloppy technique with IV stopcocks. And yet we see everyone doing that, and in a sense we are normalizing or rationalizing that deviant behavior. Think of wearing or not wearing a mask during your axial block. Such a simple thing that has been shown, again, systematically, to be associated in certain rare, admittedly rare circumstances with bacterial meningitis. Think of hand hygiene, putting unsterile dressings on IVs. I think normalization of deviance is a major threat to patient safety, and it's something that we often don't give enough attention to.
One of the easiest things to have happen today is to get discouraged, especially as a new entrant. You come in with a certain almost Pollyannish idea about how things are supposed to be, how your professors told you they were, and then the real world kind of comes in around you. This is very important to remember. We do not have a healthcare system in the United States. It is a great non-system. of wonderful parts and wonderful people, but we are assembling it into a system for the first time. We may do it better or we may do it worse. We may have to have the federal government decide on it for us, but eventually it will take a completely different form. You're writing on a blank sheet of paper, essentially, and every single participant, whether you're just wobbling out of college with a fresh degree or whether you've been around a while, has an opportunity to write large on how it should be. Those who hunker down and say, I'm just going to look through my little tube and sit here and shake until I know what to do, are not contributing in any way. As a matter of fact, you're contributing to the problem. Every graduate has a very big responsibility to help in constructing a real system and constructing one based on full communication and never allowing disrespectful conduct to go on around you and never allowing somebody to turn around and say, sit down and shut up, you don't have the authority to speak. It takes backbone. Sometimes it takes risking your profession. But that's what that oath is all about, whether it's the Hippocratic or it's another one, the basic idea that we're here to do no harm, and that is not a suggestion.